The bass thumped through the walls of Club Neptune, the most exclusive military hangout in Norfolk, Virginia. The dim lighting cast long shadows across the crowded dance floor where off-duty servicemen and women tried to forget the stress of their demanding careers. Tonight, like every Friday night, the club was packed with Marines, Navy personnel, and other military branches looking to blow off steam. Commander Sarah Mitchell sat at the far end of the bar, nursing her second whiskey on the rocks. At 34, she had earned more respect and fear from her enemies than most people twice her age. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore civilian clothes, a simple black dress and leather jacket. To anyone watching, she looked like just another attractive woman enjoying a quiet drink alone. What they couldn't see was the calculating mind behind those calm green eyes, or the calloused hands that had guided some of the most dangerous missions in modern military history. Commander Mitchell wasn't just any Navy officer. She was the leader of SEAL Team Viper, one of the most classified and deadly special operations units in the United States military. The team had just returned from a 6-month deployment in Syria, where they had successfully eliminated 3 high-value terrorist targets and rescued 12 American hostages. The mission had been so classified that even the Pentagon brass only knew the bare minimum details. Sarah's team had earned a reputation for getting the impossible done, and she had earned a reputation for being absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting her country and her men. Tonight was supposed to be her night off. Her first real break in 8 months. She had specifically chosen Club Neptune because it was known for being a place where military personnel could relax without being bothered. The unwritten rule was simple: respect each other's space, and everyone could have a good time. That rule was about to be broken. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison had been drinking since 6 p.m., and it was now past 11. The 28-year-old Marine had just returned from his own deployment, but his mission hadn't gone nearly as well as Sarah's. His unit had lost 2 men in an ambush that could have been prevented if their intelligence had been better. Jake was angry, frustrated, and looking for someone to blame for everything that had gone wrong in his life. Jake had been watching Sarah for the past hour, making crude comments to his buddies about what he'd like to do with her. His friends had tried to get him to calm down, but Jake was in one of his moods. He had always been the type of Marine who believed that his rank and his service record gave him certain privileges, especially when it came to women. "Watch this," Jake slurred to his friend Tony, a fellow Marine who was getting increasingly uncomfortable with Jake's behavior. "I'm gonna show that stuck-up broad what a real Marine can do." Tony grabbed Jake's arm as he started to get up. "Come on, man. Leave her alone. She's not bothering anyone." Jake shook him off. "Relax, Tony. I'm just gonna be friendly. What's the worst that could happen?" Sarah noticed Jake approaching in her peripheral vision, but she didn't turn around. She had dealt with drunk servicemen before, and her first instinct was always to try to defuse situations peacefully. She took another sip of her whiskey and hoped he would just ask for her number and move on when she politely declined. Instead, Jake slid up next to her and immediately invaded her personal space. She could smell the beer on his breath and the aggressive cologne he had doused himself in. "Hey there, gorgeous," Jake said, his words slightly slurred but his tone confident. "You look like you could use some company." Sarah turned slightly toward him, her expression neutral but alert. "I'm fine, thanks. Just enjoying a quiet drink." Jake laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Come on, don't be like that. I'm a United States Marine, baby. I just got back from fighting for your freedom. The least you could do is show a little appreciation." Sarah's jaw tightened slightly, but her voice remained calm. "I appreciate your service, but I'd like to be left alone." This was not the response Jake had expected. In his alcohol-fueled mind, every woman should be grateful for his attention. His face darkened, and he moved even closer, now pressing against her arm. "Listen here, sweetheart," Jake said, his voice taking on a nasty edge. "I don't think you understand who you're talking to. I'm a decorated Marine. I've killed more people than you've probably ever met. So when I say you should show some appreciation, you should listen." Several other patrons had started to notice the confrontation, but nobody wanted to get involved. This was a military bar, and Jake's uniform and bearing clearly marked him as someone you didn't mess with. What they couldn't see was that Sarah's calm demeanor was not fear, it was the same icy control she used when planning operations that would determine whether her team lived or died. "I've asked you politely to leave me alone," Sarah said, her voice still level but now carrying a subtle warning that Jake was too drunk and too arrogant to pick up on. "Please respect that." Jake's hand suddenly shot out and grabbed Sarah's wrist, his grip tight enough to bruise. "You know what your problem is? You think you're too good for a real man? Maybe you need someone to teach you some manners." That was the line that Sarah would not allow anyone to cross. In one fluid motion that was almost too fast to follow, Sarah twisted her wrist out of Jake's grip, grabbed his thumb, and bent it back at an angle that sent shooting pain up his arm. At the same time, she pivoted on her stool so that she was facing him directly, her other hand coming up to rest gently but threateningly against his throat. The entire movement took less than 2 seconds, and suddenly, Jake found himself completely immobilized, staring into a pair of green eyes that had gone from calm to absolutely deadly. "Here's what's going to happen," Sarah said, her voice now carrying the tone she used when briefing her team before a kill mission. "You're going to apologize for putting your hands on me without permission. Then, you're going to go back to your friends, finish your drink, and leave this establishment. If you ever touch me or any other woman without consent again, you'll discover that there are much worse things than getting your thumb broken." Jake's alcohol-clouded brain was trying to process what had just happened. One moment he had been in control, intimidating what he thought was just another civilian woman. Now he was trapped by someone who clearly knew exactly how to hurt him, and hurt him badly. But Jake's arrogance ran deeper than his common sense. Instead of backing down, he decided to escalate. "You crazy bitch," he snarled, trying to pull away from her grip. "Do you have any idea who you're messing with?" Sarah increased the pressure on his thumb just enough to make him wince. "Actually, I think the more relevant question is whether you know who you're messing with." Jake's friend Tony had gotten up from their table and was approaching, but he stopped when he saw the look on Sarah's face. Tony had been in enough combat situations to recognize someone who was genuinely dangerous, and every instinct he had was telling him that this woman was not someone to underestimate. "Jake," Tony called out, his voice carrying a note of warning. "Maybe we should just call it a night." But Jake was beyond listening to reason. The combination of alcohol, frustration from his failed mission, and wounded pride was driving him to make the biggest mistake of his military career. "This isn't over," Jake hissed at Sarah. "You have no idea what I'm capable of." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, and, when she spoke, her voice was so quiet that only Jake could hear her. "Sergeant Morrison, 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines. Deployed to Kandahar Province, Afghanistan, 2018 to 2019. Bronze Star for Valor, Purple Heart for injuries sustained during an IED attack outside Marja. Currently stationed at Camp Lejeune under Colonel Richards." Jake's eyes went wide. How could this random woman possibly know his service record? Sarah continued, her voice still barely above a whisper. "Your unit lost 2 men 3 weeks ago during a reconnaissance mission that went wrong because your intelligence was outdated. You blame yourself, which is why you've been drinking heavily every night since you got back. You think proving your dominance over random women is going to make you feel like a man again." Jake's face had gone completely white. Who are you? Sarah released his thumb and stepped back, but her posture remained alert and ready. "I'm someone who knows exactly what you're capable of, Sergeant Morrison. The question is whether you're smart enough to know what I'm capable of." The bar had gone noticeably quieter. Other patrons were beginning to sense that something significant was happening, even if they couldn't hear the conversation. The bartender, a former Navy chief named Mike, was keeping a close eye on the situation while discreetly reaching for the phone to call security if needed. Jake rubbed his thumb, which was already starting to swell. His mind was racing, trying to figure out how this woman could possibly know such detailed information about his service record and recent deployment. That kind of information wasn't public. Hell, most of it was classified. "Who are you?" he repeated, his voice now less aggressive and more confused. Sarah picked up her whiskey and took a small sip before answering. I'm someone who's trying to enjoy a quiet drink. Someone who has asked you politely multiple times to leave her alone. Someone who really doesn't want to have to explain to her commanding officer why she broke a Marine's arm in a bar fight. Jake's eyes narrowed. Your commanding officer? Your military? Was that not obvious? Jake looked her up and down, taking in her civilian clothes and trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he was hearing. What branch? What rank? Sarah set down her glass and looked directly at him. That depends. Are you going to apologize and walk away, or do I need to educate you about the chain of command? Jake's pride warred with his growing realization that he had made a serious error in judgment. He had assumed that because Sarah was a woman in civilian clothes, sitting alone at a bar, she must be an easy target. But everything about her body language, her knowledge of his service record, and the way she had neutralized his attempt to intimidate her suggested that he had picked the wrong person to mess with. Tony stepped closer, clearly hoping to defuse the situation. Jake, seriously, let's just go. This isn't worth it. But Jake was still too angry and too drunk to make smart decisions. Instead of apologizing, he decided to double down. I don't care if you're military, he said, raising his voice loud enough that other people could hear. No woman talks to me like that. I don't care what rank you think you are. That was when Sarah made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her military ID, holding it up so that Jake could see it clearly. Even in the dim light of the bar, the gold lettering was visible. Commander Sarah Mitchell, United States Navy. Special Operations Command. Jake stared at the ID for several seconds, his alcohol-impaired brain trying to process what he was seeing. A commander outranked him significantly, and special operations meant she wasn't just any Navy officer. But Jake's arrogance was deeper than his respect for rank. Special operations? What, you push papers for the real operators? I've been in actual combat, lady. I've killed actual enemies. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Is that what you think special operations means? I think it means you sit behind a desk while real warriors do the fighting. Sarah nodded slowly, as if she had expected this response. Sergeant Morrison, I'm going to give you one more chance to apologize and walk away. Not because I'm afraid of you, but because what happens next will end your career. Jake laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. You're threatening me? A desk jockey is threatening a combat marine? Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and saw a text message that made her sigh internally. It was from her second-in-command, Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez. Package arrived early. Need you at base ASAP. So much for her night off. Sarah put her phone away and looked back at Jake, who was still waiting for her response to his challenge. Sergeant Morrison, she said, her voice carrying the tone she used during mission briefings, you have exactly 30 seconds to make a choice. You can apologize for your behavior, return to your table, and we can both pretend this never happened. Or you can continue to disrespect a superior officer, and I'll have to treat this as the disciplinary matter it's become. Jake's face flushed red. Superior officer? You think wearing a commander's bars makes you better than someone who's actually been in the shit? Sarah looked at him for a long moment, and Jake could swear he saw something like pity in her eyes. No, Sergeant Morrison. I don't think my rank makes me better than you. But my job does require me to make sure that Marines like you understand the importance of discipline and respect. Your job? Jake scoffed. What job? Filing reports about what the real soldiers are doing? Sarah finished her whiskey and set the empty glass on the bar. She left a $20 bill next to it, more than enough to cover her drinks and a generous tip for Mike. My job, she said, standing up from her stool, is commanding SEAL Team Viper. We're the unit that gets called when other special operations teams need backup. We're the people who handle the missions that are too dangerous or too classified for regular SEALs. Jake's expression shifted from arrogance to confusion to the first hint of genuine concern. SEAL teams were legendary in the military community. Even Marines had grudging respect for what SEALs could do. "You're lying," he said, but there was less conviction in his voice now. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed him the text message she had just received. The sender was listed as SOCOM Norfolk Base Commander. "I have to cut this conversation short, Sergeant Morrison. I'm being called in for an emergency mission briefing. But, before I go, let me ask you something." She stepped closer to him, and Jake instinctively took a step back. "Do you really think the Navy would put someone who pushes papers in charge of the deadliest special operations team in the military? Do you think they'd give that job to someone who hasn't proven themselves in combat?" Jake opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. "Here's what's going to happen," Sarah continued. "I'm going to leave now to go do my job. You're going to think very carefully about how you treat people, especially women, in the future. And if I ever hear that you've put your hands on someone without their consent again, I'll make sure your commanding officer hears about tonight's conversation." She turned to walk away, then paused and looked back at him. "Oh, and, Sergeant Morrison? The next time you want to prove how tough you are, you might want to make sure you're not picking a fight with someone who's killed more enemies than you've ever seen." As Sarah walked toward the exit, the entire bar watched in silence. Jake stood frozen, staring after her, his mind trying to process what had just happened. Tony grabbed his arm and pulled him toward their table. "Dude, we need to leave. Now." She was bluffing, Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. "There's no way she's really in charge of a SEAL team." But even as he said it, Jake was remembering the way she had moved when she grabbed his thumb, the calm confidence in her voice, and the detailed knowledge she had about his service record. Those weren't things a desk jockey would know how to do. Sarah walked out into the cool Norfolk evening and pulled out her phone to call for an Uber. As she waited, she thought about the mission briefing she was about to attend. Her team was being deployed to eliminate a terrorist cell that had been planning an attack on American soil. It was exactly the kind of high-stakes, life-or-death mission that Jake Morrison thought she'd never seen. Inside the bar, Jake was finally starting to understand the magnitude of his mistake. He had tried to intimidate and assault a woman who commanded some of the most elite warriors in the world. A woman whose job it was to make life-or-death decisions under pressure that would break most people. As Sarah's Uber arrived and she climbed into the back seat, she was already shifting her focus from the unpleasant encounter at the bar to the mission ahead. But she made a mental note to follow up on Sergeant Morrison. Men like him were dangerous when they thought their rank and service gave them the right to intimidate others. If he didn't learn from tonight's lesson, she would make sure he learned it another way. The last thing Jake Morrison saw as he stumbled out of Club Neptune was the Uber carrying Commander Sarah Mitchell disappearing into the Norfolk night, heading toward a military base where some of the most dangerous people in the world would salute her and wait for her orders. He had no idea that before the sun rose, she would be on a plane to a classified location, leading a mission that would save hundreds of American lives. He had no idea that the desk jockey he had tried to intimidate was about to prove once again why she was considered one of the most effective military commanders of her generation. But he was about to find out. Commander Sarah Mitchell's Uber pulled up to the main gate of Naval Station Norfolk at exactly 11:47 p.m. The guard recognized her immediately, even in civilian clothes, and waved the vehicle through without the usual security check. Sarah thanked the driver and walked briskly toward the Special Operations Command building, her mind already shifting from the unpleasant encounter at Club Neptune to whatever crisis had required her immediate attention. The SOCOM building was a nondescript concrete structure that looked like any other administrative facility on the base. What wasn't visible from the outside were the underground levels that housed some of the most classified military operations in the world. Sarah badged through 3 separate security checkpoints before reaching the elevator that would take her down to the operations center. Lieutenant Commander Miguel Rodriguez was waiting for her when the elevator doors opened. At 31, Rodriguez had been Sarah's second-in-command for 2 years, and she trusted him completely. He was a former Navy SEAL who had earned his way onto Team Viper through a combination of tactical brilliance and absolute loyalty to his teammates. "Sorry to ruin your night off, Commander," Rodriguez said as they walked down the sterile hallway toward the briefing room. "But this couldn't wait until morning. What do we have?" Sarah asked, already in mission mode. Intelligence intercept from NSA. They picked up chatter about something called Operation Red Dawn happening in the next 48 hours. Initial analysis suggests it's a coordinated terrorist attack on American soil, possibly targeting multiple civilian locations. Sarah felt her jaw tighten. This was exactly the kind of scenario that kept her awake at night, not the thought of dying in combat, but the possibility of failing to prevent innocent Americans from being killed on her watch. They entered the briefing room where the rest of Team Viper was already assembled. 12 of the most elite special operations soldiers in the world, each handpicked by Sarah for their unique skills and absolute reliability. They had been called in from their various Friday night activities, but every one of them looked alert and ready for action. "Gentlemen," Sarah said as she took her position at the front of the room, "we have a potential terrorist attack to prevent. Rodriguez, bring everyone up to speed." Rodriguez activated the large wall display, which showed a map of the eastern United States with several cities highlighted in red. At 2100 hours tonight, NSA intercepted encrypted communications between known terrorist operatives. The messages referenced Red Dawn and mentioned coordination between cells in Norfolk, Virginia Beach, and Washington, D.C. CIA analysts believe this refers to a simultaneous attack plan for sometime in the next 2 days. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson, Team Viper's explosives expert, raised his hand. "Do we know what kind of attack? Bombing, shooting, chemical?" "Unknown at this time," Rodriguez replied. "But the intelligence suggests whatever they're planning is big enough to require coordination between multiple cells. We're talking about potentially hundreds of casualties." Sarah studied the map, her mind already working through possible scenarios. "What's our mission priority?" Admiral Patricia Hayes, the base commander who had called Sarah in, stepped forward. Admiral Hayes was a no-nonsense officer who had earned her way to the top through 30 years of exemplary service, and she had specifically requested that Team Viper be assigned to this operation. "Your mission is to locate and neutralize the terrorist cells before they can execute their attack," Admiral Hayes said. "We have authorization from the highest levels to use any means necessary to prevent American casualties." Petty Officer First Class Danny Kim, the team's intelligence specialist, looked up from his laptop. "Commander, I'm pulling up everything we have on known terrorist operatives in the Norfolk area. There are 3 individuals who have been on our watch list for the past 6 months." The display changed to show photographs and biographical information for 3 men. Sarah studied their faces, committing every detail to memory. These were the people who wanted to kill innocent Americans, and she would not let that happen. Hassan al-Rashid, age 34, Syrian national who entered the country on a student visa 18 months ago, Kim continued. "He's been studying chemical engineering at Old Dominion University, but our surveillance suggests he's been using his access to university labs for non-academic purposes. Mohammed Qasimi, age 28, American-born but with known connections to ISIS operatives overseas. He works as a maintenance supervisor for the Virginia Beach Convention Center, which gives him access to a facility that hosts thousands of people every day." And Yusuf Nazir, age 31, Pakistani national who owns a small electronics shop in downtown Norfolk. "We believe he's been using his business as a front for acquiring components that could be used to build explosive devices." Sarah absorbed all of this information while simultaneously planning their approach. 3 targets, potentially coordinated attack, unknown timeline. This was exactly the kind of mission that required Team Viper's unique capabilities. "What's our intelligence on their current locations?" she asked. Kim typed rapidly on his laptop. Al-Rashid was last seen at his apartment near the ODU campus at approximately 1900 hours. Qasimi finished his shift at the convention center at 1800 hours and hasn't been seen since. Nazir's electronics shop closed at normal time, but thermal imaging shows activity in the building as recently as 30 minutes ago. Sarah nodded. "We'll hit all 3 locations simultaneously. Team Alpha will take Al-Rashid, Team Beta will handle Qasimi, and I'll lead Team Charlie against Nazir. We need at least one of them alive for questioning, so non-lethal force unless they pose an immediate threat to civilians or team members." Admiral Hayes stepped forward again. "Commander Mitchell, there's one more thing you need to know. The FBI has been tracking these individuals for months, but they haven't been able to get authorization for arrests because the evidence is largely circumstantial. If your teams find concrete evidence of terrorist planning, it needs to be documented properly for prosecution. Understood, Admiral. We'll treat this as a joint military law enforcement operation. Sarah turned back to her team. These men had followed her through some of the most dangerous missions in modern military history, and she knew they would follow her into hell if she asked them to. Tonight, she was asking them to prevent hell from being brought to American soil. Listen up, people, she said, her voice carrying the authority that came from years of successful leadership. We have American lives depending on us tonight. These terrorists think they can bring their war to our homeland, but they're about to learn why that's a mistake. Meanwhile, across the city at Camp Lejeune, Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison was lying in his bunk, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of what had happened at Club Neptune. The alcohol was slowly wearing off, and, with sobriety came the uncomfortable realization that he might have made a serious mistake. Jake's roommate, Corporal Mike Stevens, had listened to Jake's rambling account of the evening and wasn't buying the story that some random woman had claimed to be a Navy SEAL commander. "Dude, you're drunk," Stevens had said. "There's no way some chick in a bar is commanding a SEAL team. You probably just hit on someone's wife and she made up a story to scare you off." But Jake couldn't shake the memory of how Sarah had moved when she grabbed his thumb, or the way she had recited his service record with perfect accuracy. Those weren't things a civilian would know how to do. Unable to sleep, Jake got up and walked to the computer station in the barracks common area. He logged into the military database and began searching for information about Commander Sarah Mitchell, United States Navy. What he found made his blood run cold. Commander Sarah J. Mitchell, Commanding Officer of Naval Special Warfare Development Group Team Viper. Decorated veteran with 3 Bronze Stars, 2 Silver Stars, and a Medal of Honor for actions during a classified operation in Syria. Graduate of the Naval Academy, U.S. Army Ranger School, and multiple specialized combat training programs. Credited with over 40 successful special operations missions with 0 friendly casualties. Jake stared at the screen, reading and rereading Sarah's service record. This wasn't just any Navy officer. This was one of the most decorated special operations commanders in the military. And he had tried to intimidate her, grabbed her wrist, and told her she needed to be taught manners. "Oh God," Jake whispered to himself. "What have I done?" He scrolled through more of Sarah's record, finding commendations from generals and admirals, records of classified missions that had saved American lives, and photos of her receiving medals from high-ranking officials. In one photo, she was shaking hands with the Secretary of Defense after a mission that had prevented a terrorist attack on American soil. Jake's hands were shaking as he realized the full magnitude of his mistake. He hadn't just disrespected a superior officer, he had physically grabbed and threatened one of the most elite military commanders in the world. Someone whose job it was to hunt down and eliminate people who threatened American lives. Back at the SOCOM Operations Center, Sarah was reviewing the final details of the mission plan with her team leaders. They would deploy in 20 minutes, using 3 separate teams to hit all 3 targets simultaneously. Speed and surprise would be crucial. If one terrorist cell was alerted, they might warn the others. "Rodriguez, your team takes the convention center. Cassimy might be meeting with other operatives there, so be prepared for multiple hostiles," Sarah instructed. "Thompson, you and Team Alpha handle Al-Rashid. If he's got chemical weapons components, we need to secure them without causing contamination." "What about you, Commander?" Rodriguez asked. "The electronics shop might be where they're building explosive devices. That's going to be the most dangerous target." Sarah smiled grimly. "That's why I'm taking it personally. These people want to bring terror to American soil. I'm going to show them what American terror looks like." The team members checked their weapons and equipment one final time. Each operator carried a suppressed assault rifle, sidearm, flashbang grenades, zip-tie restraints, and specialized breaching equipment. They were dressed in black tactical gear with night vision capabilities, looking like something out of a nightmare for anyone foolish enough to threaten American citizens. Remember, Sarah said as they prepared to deploy, we want prisoners for intelligence if possible, but protecting civilian lives is the absolute priority. If these terrorists have weapons or explosives ready to deploy, we neutralize the threat immediately. As the teams loaded into their vehicles for transport to the target locations, Sarah's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from NSA intelligence. They had intercepted another communication suggesting that the attack might be planned for the morning rush hour in downtown Norfolk and Virginia Beach. Thousands of innocent people could die if Team Viper failed tonight. Sarah climbed into the lead vehicle and activated her communication system to coordinate with the other teams. As they drove through the dark Norfolk streets toward their targets, she thought about all the people who were sleeping peacefully in their homes, completely unaware that their lives were depending on a small group of elite warriors who had sworn to protect them. This was why she did this job. Not for the adrenaline or the recognition, but for the absolute certainty that there were evil people in the world who wanted to hurt innocent Americans, and someone had to stand between them and their intended victims. At Camp Lejeune, Jake Morrison had printed out several pages of Commander Mitchell's service record and was reading through them again, trying to understand how he had so completely misjudged the situation at Club Neptune. The woman he had tried to intimidate wasn't just a decorated officer, she was a genuine American hero who had dedicated her life to protecting people like him. Jake found records of a mission in Afghanistan where Sarah's team had rescued an entire Marine platoon that had been pinned down by enemy fire. The Marines she saved had written letters of commendation describing how Team Viper had appeared out of nowhere, eliminated the enemy position, and evacuated the wounded Marines under heavy fire. One of those Marines had been from Jake's own unit. She saved Ramirez and his team, Jake whispered to himself, remembering how Sergeant Ramirez had told stories about being rescued by some badass Navy SEALs during his previous deployment. Jake had never made the connection that the commander who had saved his fellow Marines was the same woman he had tried to assault in a bar. Jake's phone buzzed with a text message from Tony, his friend who had witnessed the encounter at Club Neptune. Dude, you need to see this. Just looked up that woman from the bar. Holy shit, man. You fucked up big time. But Jake was already far ahead of Tony in understanding just how badly he had screwed up. As he read through mission after mission where Sarah had put her life on the line to protect American service members and civilians, Jake began to understand that he had attacked someone who represented everything good about military service. At exactly 1:30 a.m., Team Viper began their synchronized assault on the three terrorist targets. Sarah's team approached Nazir's electronics shop from the rear while Rodriguez's team surrounded the Virginia Beach Convention Center and Thompson's team prepared to breach Al-Rashid's apartment. Through her night vision scope, Sarah could see movement inside the electronics shop. Three figures were working frantically with what appeared to be electronic components and wiring. This was not the scene of a legitimate business operation, this was a bomb-making factory. All teams, this is Viper 6, Sarah whispered into her communication system. I have visual confirmation of hostile activity at Target Charlie. Looks like active bomb construction. Recommend immediate simultaneous breach of all targets. Viper 2 copies, Rodriguez replied. Movement at Target Bravo as well. Appears to be a meeting in progress. Viper 3 standing by, Thompson added. Target Alpha appears to be sleeping, but thermal shows chemical signatures consistent with lab equipment. Sarah made the decision that would save hundreds of American lives. All teams, execute breach on my mark. 3, 2, 1, execute. The night erupted in controlled violence as three of the most elite special operations teams in the world simultaneously struck the terrorist cells that had been planning to bring terror to American soil. But, for Sarah Mitchell and her teams, this was just another day at the office, protecting the innocent and eliminating those who would harm them. Jake Morrison, lying in his bunk at Camp Lejeune, had no idea that the woman he had disrespected and attacked was at that very moment risking her life to protect him and every other American from a terrorist attack. He was about to learn that Commander Sarah Mitchell didn't just talk about serving her country, she proved it every single day. The explosions from the breaching charges lit up the Norfolk night as Team Viper executed their coordinated assault on the three terrorist locations. Sarah's team moved through the back entrance of Nazir's electronics shop with the fluid precision that had made them legendary among special operations units worldwide. The first terrorist never saw them coming. Sarah's point man, Petty Officer Ryan Walsh, neutralized him with a suppressed double tap before he could reach for the detonator sitting on the workbench. The second terrorist tried to grab an AK-47 propped against the wall but found himself face down on the floor with zip ties around his wrists before he could chamber a round. Yusuf Nazir, the shop owner and cell leader, was standing over a partially assembled bomb when Sarah herself appeared in front of him like a shadow given form. He reached for a pistol tucked into his waistband, but Sarah's reflexes were faster than his fear. Her suppressed M4 carbine was pressed against his forehead before his hand reached his weapon. "Move and you die," Sarah said quietly. Her voice was calm, professional, and absolutely terrifying in its certainty. Nazir raised his hand slowly, his eyes wide with shock and rage. "You cannot stop us," he said in accented English. "There are others. Our brothers will complete the mission." Sarah didn't respond immediately. She was scanning the bomb components scattered across the workbench, her trained eye identifying enough explosive material to level half a city block. Commercial-grade C4, electronic timers, cell phone detonators, and what appeared to be homemade chemical accelerants. These terrorists hadn't been planning a small attack, they had been building weapons of mass destruction. "Walsh, secure the explosives," she ordered. "Martinez, get our friend here ready for transport. I want every piece of equipment in this shop cataloged and bagged for analysis." Through her earpiece, she could hear updates from the other teams. Viper 2 has secured target Bravo. 3 hostiles in custody, including Qasemi. Found plans for coordinated attack on morning rush hour. Viper 3 has target Alpha secured. Al-Rashid was cooking chemical weapons in his kitchen. We've got